You are listening to Through the Void Gate, a Warcaster podcast for new and experienced players. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 1 of Through the Void Gate. I'm your host, Josh Essex, and today I'm joined by Andrew from Glass Half Dead on YouTube. Welcome, Andrew.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me, and thanks for listening.
So, anybody that's followed the Warcaster Facebook page, Andrew recently put out a Learn to Play Warcaster video that is very comprehensive. It is a great tool for anyone looking to get into the game. I will be linking his YouTube page in the comments section of this episode, so make sure to check that out. Before we get down to the goods, I just wanted to kind of lay out the how we're basically going to cover stuff going in the future. The first part of the podcast is going to be us just covering whatever news has come about for Warcaster. And then we'll get into the topic of that episode. And then I want to round out every episode with a few viewer questions. Just fill in some blanks for people that have questions. Maybe talk about something fun at the end. I want to be as interactive as possible. So that's the plan. I'm hoping Andrew joins me for a few episodes, if not going forward. And then we might have a guest star every once in a while, just to mix it up.
I mean, I only know so much about Warcaster, I can only lie for so long till people start catching on.
I don't know, man. That video you put out, it's pretty crisp. I think you're selling yourself short.
You know what? I get why you think that. But actually, very genuinely, once you know the turn structure, the game is really simple. To explain the rules, once you have that back of the rulebook turn structure, simple game. Yeah.
Uh-huh. This is like that fake it till you make it thing, eh?
I do regularly say on my channel that I'm a really bad player and then win tournaments. So I don't know. It could be anything. But, yeah.
You're humble. That's cool. So, yesterday was a big day for Privateer Press. It was their 2020 Keynote, and boy, did we get a lot of information. They announced several things for all their other games, but they spent a good chunk of time talking about Warcaster. Not only did we get the 4th faction that people were expecting to be announced, but we also got a rundown of a vehicle for each faction that got teased in the Kickstarter emails probably a couple weeks ago now. So for you guys that didn't catch the keynote, I'm just going to go over each of the jacks for the new faction and the vehicles real quickly, and then we'll talk about what we think of everything, the design, and we'll just go from there. Sound good, Andrew?
Sounds perfect. But before you jump in, I have one question.
What's up?
And you're gonna say it soon, but the name for the 4th faction, how are you pronouncing that?
I'm pronouncing it Empyreans.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Same across the pond, Empyreans, yeah.
Okay, because in their little fluff blurb they did before they showed us, they said something about the Hyperians.
Hyperanians or whatever.
Hyperanians. There we go. Thank you.
It's spelled Aunions.
Yes.
However you want to spell that or say that, yeah.
I think you nailed it. It took me probably 5 minutes, and I got nowhere close. So we're going with your pronunciation.
Ooh, okay, I'm going to have to definitely look at the word written down before we nail that in, but okay, sure.
So, the 4th faction is, as we just discussed, the Empyreans. They're a kind of a robot insect race. They talked about how the galaxy is mostly empty and people wanted to know where everybody went. Well, it's highly theorized that people and apparently aliens uploaded their souls into machinery in the Cyrus universe. So, this is kind of an alien insect race that has now taken on mechanical bodies. That's the best way I can describe it. They look super cool, so we're just going to start flipping through, and I'll give you the rundown of what we know. So the first thing we saw was the daemon, or demon. I'm going with daemon, though, because the A is first. It is their light warjack. It has cortex and arm weapon options, basically like normal. There's no word if the tentacles on its back actually do anything yet, but I would maybe keep an eye open for it to have a third attack. They didn't give us a whole lot of info on the daemon, but it does come in the starter box. Their heavy warjack is the Sentinel. The Sentinel has a little bit of a different setup for its hard points. Its hard points are arm, and chest. So it actually has a swappable chest plate with different weapon options. And again, it's sporting those nasty tentacles, which I want to know if it does anything. And then we got our first look at their solos. And when I think Empyreans now, this is the first thing that comes to mind. Like the Oculus kind of embodies what the Empyreans are about. Very insect-like, slithering, very gangly. The Empyreans have a very Matrix feel to them, in my opinion. Now, the Oculus is their weaver, so that is kind of cool. It looks a bit squishy compared to other weavers. I'm interested to see its stats. It was noted that the Empyreans can play around with Arc in a way that none of the other factions currently in the game can. They said it's not going to be 100% free flow, but they're going to have some crazy things that they can do with Arc, unlike other factions. So it might add a different level to the game. And then next we got 2 solos, and like the Fulcrum looks like it's straight out of the Matrix. Like, I can't remember what they called it from the Matrix, but that's the thing that chased them around. So
They're just called Sentinels.
The Sentinels. Thank you. It has been a hot minute since I watched the Matrix. So the Fulcrum is their support solo. It has a big gun mounted on it, so it's not going to be just 100% support. And its big thing is it can move friendlies and enemies. It can just freely move a friendly character, but it has to shoot the enemy and hit to move the enemy. Either way, it could be big for positioning and scoring, so I would keep an eye on the Fulcrum as we get more information. And then, believe it or not, the Factotum is their mechanic. It looks pretty scary as a mechanic. Those giant pincers and tentacles look more like it does harm than good, but apparently it repairs your stuff. So, I'm loving the look of these models. They look great. The sculpting team did an amazing job with the new faction.
I'm loving them. And I've said this already on multiple posts on Reddit. I think that maybe I'm projecting here, but I think they have instantly become 80% of the player base's favorite faction aesthetically, right?
Yeah, I bet you if you were to take a poll, you're right. It'd be between Empyreans and AC. Because people do like that dark goth look of the AC. I think more people would be playing the AC if they weren't supposed to be a later release. But
Right.
For anyone else that missed it, the AC starter box has been rumored to have been moved to Wave 1. So
It definitely is, yeah.
That for anyone that was worried about having to wait a little longer, there you go. Next we have their 3 squads, which puts them above any other faction for squads coming out. There's the Saber Guardians, which is their heavy squad. Each one of their squads has a tentacle on the back of their head, as you can see in the... Well, I guess if you're listening, you won't be able to see it, but if you're watching this on Twitch, there's a tentacle coming off the back of each of their heads, which will give them a tentacle strike on top of their other 2 attacks. And then the Saber Guardian has a very large gun, so look for it to do some big damage. Now, we also have the Saber Strike Force, which is their generic kind of squad. It has a melee weapon and a gun, like most starting squads, and they again have that tentacle strike coming off the back of their head. And then lastly, there's the Saber Vanguard. They have double melee weapons and the tentacle strike, so they have 3 melee weapons total. So it might take a little finagling to get them into the fight. But I think they'll be able to put in work when they get into the fight, because those knives they're rocking on their hands look mean. And then we get into the juicy bits. We have our first look at the vehicles.
Well, hold on. I think as we called out the Sentinels, we also have to call out the Protoss Zealots, right? I mean, that's what they are.
Yeah, all right. I'll give that to you. I wasn't going to make that connection, but they do have a very Protoss look to them.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, you know what? This is the pitch meeting, okay? Hey, I want to create a faction for you that mixes elements of the Matrix and Protoss Zealots. Boom, I'm sold. You don't have to say anything else. I'm there. That's not a negative. That's a selling point, right?
Yeah, that was said. They just got up from the table and walked away. They're like, all right, job done. Let's go.
Yeah, let's call it lunch. Good game. Let's go. Yeah, there you go. All right.
No, I totally agree. And you know what? StarCraft's a popular game, so maybe we'll get a look from those guys. I have a feeling that quite a few people are going to paint them up like Protoss, so I would keep an eye open for that.
Oh yeah, a lot of people are already talking in the Facebook group. That's how they're gonna paint them. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I saw a couple of polls. How do I want to paint my stuff? I look forward to it. Seeing people's like the way people paint scheme things is one of my favorite things. I like how you did your Marcher. It was Marcher, right?
I've painted both Marcher Worlds and ISA so far.
I haven't seen your ISA yet. I'll have to go take a look at that.
They're just silver, kind of.
I do like your Marcher scheme, though. Don't be surprised if I steal that from you.
Well, my Marcher scheme's just kind of what the studio did, except worse.
I wouldn't sell yourself short. It's pretty good.
Questionable. Okay. I'm actually going to change the way I do them now. But I'm definitely taking you off on a tangent here. Keep going with the vehicles, yeah.
I imagine that'll be a regular theme of the cast, so I wouldn't feel too bad about it.
It would be weird if a podcast didn't get derailed at any point.
Right. It's too structured. Too much structure in a podcast ruins it. So, now we're going to jump right in. Since we're talking about the Empyreans, we're going to go with their vehicle first. I'm a huge Gundam Wing fan, mech fan, and this looks more like something out of Gundam than it does an actual vehicle. So, it's called the Zenith, and it has a swappable head weapon. It also has a stationary weapon, but they didn't allude to where it is. I'm thinking it's probably this piece lower on its body. They have like what looks to be like an eye or cannon on its shoulders and lower on its body, but it could also come from one of these giant arm things. I'm interested to see if those have any actual effect on the game, or if that's just their way of moving about. If so, it is very mech-like. Now, the vehicles actually come with a special set of rules. Vehicles can do something called maneuvers, and they got into this a little bit during the keynote, but didn't really flesh it out because it's still in playtesting. during their activation, vehicles can pick a type of maneuver. They can either make themselves slower and increase their defense. They can sit still to let themselves shoot better, much like aim in War Machine and Hordes. They can move faster at the cost of defense to cover more ground. Or they can shoot more, which wasn't really alluded to the downside of that. But it sounds like vehicles are really going to bring another element of strategy to the game, which I think is actually pretty fascinating. Since everything we've seen right now pretty much functions the same, I think as they roll out new releases, we're going to see more and more layers to the game as people get used to it. Now we have a couple more vehicles to cover. Oh, the box real quick before I get too deep into vehicles. The box for the Empyreans, before we move on to other factions, comes with a Daemon Lightjack, an Oculus, a Fulcrum, and a Saber Strike Force squad. So you get a good mix of stuff in their box. They released some box art of it, and it looks very menacing, and I think they're probably going to rise up to be the most played faction by new players, I would say, just based on their aesthetic. And then
I probably agree. They give you something. I mean, Privateer Press in the keynote, they even said out loud that everybody kind of had commented that the first three factions are just different flavors of human.
Yeah.
And let's compare it to, let's say, Infinity. Equally kind of sci-fi, cyberpunky. If you wanted to just have that aesthetic, you could probably just pick up some Infinity models. But I mean, I don't even know where else I would go to find something with the aesthetic. Well, apart from the Matrix and Protoss, obviously. But in a tabletop game, I don't even know where else I would go to find something with the same aesthetic as the Empyreans.
Yeah,
So
I
I agree, it could just draw lots of people in just for that alone.
I took a little time flipping through the Games Workshop catalog to see if there's anything comparable in there. And there really isn't. It's like a little more sci-fi than anything they have. So it's a little more futuristic. So I agree that it's pretty unique amongst tabletop games that I've played.
If I had to say it was like anything in 40K, and keep in mind that obviously 40K's entire shtick is that it's not really sci-fi, right? It's
Yeah.
fantasy. It's literally knights with guns. They have a game called Blackstone Fortress, and in those there are something called spindle drones. It's not quite the same as what you're seeing here, but it is a little bit similar. But that's not a whole faction, it's literally one model. So, and actually it's more War of the Worlds than anything else, but yeah.
And then as they rounded out talking about the Empyreans, they dropped a photo on us that had their Sentinel Jack in the foreground and the background just littered with aliens and their Zenith ships with a giant mothership and gate in the background. So that really kind of sets the tone for how they're coming into the game. Like, they are here to deal with the humans that have brought war to their galaxy.
I think that's a good way of putting it. They are the existing threat. We are invading them.
Yeah. They were quietly living along, and then we brought our conflict to their galaxy, and they are not happy about it. So, I can't wait to get some fluff on these guys. I think the world of Warcaster is really rounding itself out to have some great lore. But we've talked about the Empyreans for quite a while now. There are some really cool vehicles for the other three factions. So let's jump into those. We have the Razorbat, which is the Marcher World's vehicle, which I thought looked like a hover tank, but we have since been told that it is more like a space jeep, which I think might be cooler considering I'm a Halo fan, so I get like Warthog feels from this, like future Warthog.
See, this is the one that I'm the least sure about. Of the four vehicles we've seen, I don't really get it. Like it looks really compact and stubby. You're saying it's like a Jeep? I say it's more like a mini Volkswagen Beetle or something. Like, I don't know. I'm not quite sure on it. I'd have to see it in person.
Yeah, it might just be the concept art. I get what you're saying, that it does look very compact,
Yeah.
but it's really hard to tell from the concept. But when they said space jeep, I instantly thought like Halo style. But a lot of people really, like, when they showed the concept art in the email, thought that it was a hover tank. But it's a light vehicle, which these are all light vehicles, which kind of hints towards that we may get heavy vehicles down the road. I think they like have mentioned it in passing, but there's been no official confirmation of it. The Razorbat has a stationary laser Gatling gun on the bottom of it, and then it has a gun on top. You can have a blazer, which is one of my favorite weapons. Being able to strafe and light things on fire is really good. And then it has the Talon Mark II, which is an anti-air rocket launcher. And then the classic slug gun. So that's a pretty good rounding of weapons. I'm interested to see what the anti-air portion of the Talon Mark II does, because we do have a Talon rocket pod currently, but there's no mention of it being anti-air. So I'm interested to see how that's teched in. But the Razorbat really does feel like a resistance kind of vehicle when you look at it. There's lots of pouches on it. Like, it gives you like a good deserty, like fighting a good fight feel. And then we get to the ISA Interceptor. It's a speeder bike. Let's be serious about that. Like, it looks like they are space cops chasing somebody down on their speeder bike. Very sleek.
So before we saw, okay, so you know there are two types of concept art, right?
Yes.
There's the one that's like artwork and is basically, you know, a wallpaper, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the ones that we saw yesterday, which is kind of a single orthographic view of the model. Oh, sorry, not the model. The yeah, that's the right word. Yeah, the model. But hand drawn, not a 3D render.
Yeah.
And of course we got the fancy artwork first of the Interceptor.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw it there, I think like most people, they look significantly smaller than the Fire. Wait, not Firebat. That's a StarCraft 2 thing. It's a Razorbat.
Yes.
Okay, the Razorbat. And so I think like some other people had thought that maybe we're going to get the Razorbat on a 50mm base, but then the Interceptors are going to be cheaper than it, and they're going to be on maybe 40s, even 30s, who knows. But then when I saw the orthographic artwork yesterday, and just how tiny the guy looks inside the huge, massive bike, I was like, oh, okay. All right, yeah, that's a 50mm base. I can see that now.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No, you're right. The artwork definitely did make like the original artwork we saw definitely made them look smaller than that hulking thing we saw yesterday.
I actually really like it. Like the new concept.
Yeah.
Where, because before they were just kind of like, oh, okay, all right, beater bikes. We've seen those.
Yep.
This seems more substantial, more like a real thing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can now say, oh, it's a guy inside a bike, not on a bike. I haven't seen that before. So, depending how the model comes out, I'm actually more excited for that now than I was before.
Yeah, so I will say, as a Marcher Worlds player, I was like, cool, Space Jeep. And then they flicked to the Interceptor, and I was like, oh man, that bike is so cool. I want space bikes now. I think the look at the model we got yesterday, if like you were saying, if it is true to kind of the size in it, they're going to look phenomenal in person.
What do you think they're going to do, like scale wise? Because remember that they're on a 50 mil base, and presumably they're not going to overhang too much. Presumably, do you think they're going to keep the people inside the vehicles at the same scale?
I'm going. I would like to, I would hope they would, but part of me thinks that it's not possible. Um,
Right.
one
I,
thing
I
they
think I'm in the same camp. Yeah.
one thing they could do though, and they already have like the precedent for this in the game, is flight bases. So they can make
Sure.
it a little larger and have it above the rest of the models, so it can touch bases and whatever else without too much conflict. It makes it a little harder for transport, but I think I would like to see that where you have like your troops and jacks on the ground, and then you have like a bit longer flight base with these things flying above them.
Yeah.
I think that way they could
I'd be okay with
overhang
that.
over their base and not be a big issue.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're right. That's probably what they're going to end up doing. Yeah.
I hope, because the just in my head, the idea of like a Zenith flying around and a couple speeder bikes chasing it or whatever just seems so cool when you like envision it.
Now, what do you? So obviously, speeder bike, right? How fast do you think it's going to move? What's the speed on that?
Ooh, I'm going
Yeah.
to say, if just wagering a guess, I want to say about 7 or 8,
Oh, okay.
because
Okay.
the Dusk Wolf, when it's loaded up with arc, goes 8. So I'm thinking just generically the bike might go 7 or 8, like to keep up with the faster jacks. Or at least I hope so, considering it is a jet bike, you know?
Oh, okay. So I was going to say, and now I'm thinking I'm completely wrong, but 10 to 12.
Whoa, if it reaches 10 to 12, that will completely change the game.
Now, obviously, so at the moment, as I'm sure you've played more than I have, that's for sure. I've only played skirmish games, but I know that when you kind of bump it up to the primary missions, like 10 to 12 inches isn't that crazy.
No, it isn't. Yeah, you're right. It isn't that game breaking in the full size games.
I agree that in skirmish it might be a bit silly,
Yeah, but
especially if you're Marcher Worlds and you could do 12 plus a 3-inch spike or whatever.
yes. But that being said, heavies and their range kind of dominate, like, is too much for skirmish as well. So after you saying that, I'm kind of thinking you might be right, and they could go 10 to 12.
I mean, so this is a whole nother discussion. This is another podcast, but skirmish versus primary. Um, I I do believe that the game is balanced for primary, and they just kind of, I don't want to say shoehorned in the skirmish, because they obviously have given it some thought. It has all of its own missions, etc. But when it comes to ranges, movement speed, I do believe they were like, okay, this is all for primary. I don't think they took secondary, not secondary, skirmish into account when they decided all of that stuff.
Yeah, I could tend to agree with that. I know, like, you have the rule book, so you have a better idea than me. I was really hoping that they would outline in the skirmish book, like, maybe that heavies aren't really uh, meant for skirmish size games. Because, again, like I've said a couple times now, I'm a Marcher Worlds player. And when I outfit my heavy warjack, it shoots 20 inches. Like, I can clear, like, I shoot clear across the table depending on what's in front of me. Like, if I can find a lane, I can shoot quite far with a Strike Raptor.
Yeah, that
So,
sounds crazy.
um, I mean, limiting them to a field allowance of 1 might help, but
I assume that the way. Okay, so let's hypothetically say that when it comes to Privateer Press putting on their first proper tournament, they are going to show us how the game should be played, kind of. And I suspect the way around heavies dominating skirmish, uh, I need to start. Yeah, it is called skirmish. Yeah, is going to be excessive amounts of terrain
yes.
to the point that, hey, you've put a heavy on the board, great. You only actually have like 10 inches range because everything else is, blocked. And you spent so much, resources getting that onto the board that actually you'd have been better off with like 2 squads or something.
Yeah. Conversely, though, with the 3D element of being able to fly on top of terrain and whatnot, depending on how the board's designed, if you get your heavy on a high, like the high ground, it could be quite nasty as far as a control aspect. So we'll have to see how that all comes into play because it is really like a multi-dimensional game compared to some of Privateer's other games. So I haven't played much 40K. Is there you're the expert on that one. Is there like 3D terrain you fly on top of in 40K?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Light, 3D terrain, all that stuff is very much a thing. And it's interesting you bring that up, actually. Just a quick note on, I think that the advancement to 3D terrain was absolutely mandatory for any new game from Privateer Press, because whenever you look at a game of Warcast, it looks really boring. Not
War Machine,
Warcast,
you mean?
that's the one, War Machine.
Yeah.
Like, I can, don't get me wrong, I love the aesthetic of the models. I absolutely love them. But the game itself never looks exciting. So, yeah.
I'm a bit biased because I started playing it many years ago and there was like 3D terrain and had some rules to do with that. Going to 2D terrain really streamlined it. But for something like Warcaster, which has more like has flying units, flying jacks, I would say that it definitely lends itself more to 3D terrain.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
But I do think that like in the natural progression of tabletop games, that everything will be going 3D terrain. Someone pointed out that 2D terrain is an advent of the players themselves, not Privateer Press,
Yes. I agree with them on that. Yeah.
which does make sense. I did kind of know that and just it slipped my mind. But it did quickly become like the prototypical way to play. Like, there's no getting on top of a hill for high ground and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess as we were talking a little bit before we hit record, one of the big issues is so I've been to LVO, and multiple times I walk past the War Machine area, and peek my head round the corner, and it looked boring to me that knows nothing about it. I was like, oh well, hold on, why do the Warhammer tables look cooler? And so I'm all for things looking cooler, even if it kind of hurts the gameplay a bit, just because it will draw in more players. There you
And
go.
I 100% agree with that. I always, until recently when I started trying to take more of a tournament approach to War Machine, I always played with 3D terrain because it gave you a more immersive feel, which Warcaster is going to have at all times. So I'm really hoping that helps it appeal to the masses a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to fit in line with every other game out there.
Yeah. But we spun off on quite a tangent there. Let's run down the interceptor rules real quick. So the interceptor has 2 machine guns mounted on the front of it, much like its Jack counterpart, that are not swappable. But it has a very large cannon underneath of it that is swappable. They didn't really get into telling us what the options for that one is, but they did say that in the playtest rules for the interceptor right now, you can spike to perform 2 maneuvers. Now, it may not end up coming out like that, but that sounds super cool. The ability to move a little faster and shoot more, or stay stationary, get a little more defense, and be more accurate. Seems like a very, very cool thing to add to, obviously, what's going to be a quick bike. Now, we were talking a bit about how far we think it's going to move. I'm thinking that maybe it's in the 10 threshold, and then when it uses its maneuver, maybe it bumps up to 12 to cover that little bit of extra ground. We'll have to see how they're working the numbers. But I do think it being able to use 2 maneuvers is going to be crazy for the ISA.
Yeah, I mean, until we really know what maneuvers are, it's hard to say anything concrete. But yeah, it sounds like it could be very cool. And obviously, just from an aesthetic perspective, I assume it's going to move further than the Razor Bat. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's gonna be faster than both the Razorbat and the Zenith. And it's interesting that the jet bike is going to have 2 maneuvers, which, like, obviously goes to having more mobility, which has typically thus far in the game been a Marcher Worlds thing. So maybe the jet bike is their answer to the Marcher Worlds mobility and speed.
Yeah, I mean, I assume every faction will eventually end up with, a unit that allows them to fill in a hole that, another faction will exploit. Yeah. It won't allow them to do it as well as that other faction, but yeah.
Now, we're going to move on to probably the nastiest looking vehicle, which I apparently only got a small image of. So, while I talk about that, I'm going to go see if I can't fetch a bigger one for everybody. The Scythe, which is the ISA.
No, it's not.
Not ISA, sorry. Aternus Continuum's vehicle. Thank you. It is a very nasty looking... I almost want to call it a bike again, except for the riders mounted more in the rear. It has a giant blade hanging off the side, which people have, which was alluded to in the keynote, that they'll be able to basically drive by things and slash them with it, which leads me to think that it's going to have some sort of drive-by attack where it can keep moving, which, if that's the case, oh boy, that is crazy in itself. And then it has swappable weapons. So the Scythe is on the right side of it. It has swappable weapons on the left side of it, and the only thing we know about it is that it gets the holophage cannon, which, if anyone's played any games against the AC, holophage is probably their nastiest weapon they have. It reduces your armor when it hits you, so it makes everything else that hits you much, much harder. So I am hoping that it will be able to shoot and then drive into you. it may not be a thing, but if it is able to shoot you and then drive into you with that giant blade, it could have a lot of potential for being high damage, which is technically AC's thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume, total guess, that it's going to have a pretty, standard rule. If you can, this base can move through any other model's volume, and as long as you can finish not, in base to base, then you do X damage or whatever, or you do 4 power hit, whatever. And then I don't see why that would stop you from shooting, unless it's a balance thing, obviously. So
Yeah, like
yeah,
typically in the game you can shoot and then move. So I'm really hoping that you can shoot with the scythe and then fly into it with the blade, because if so, that could make it potentially one of the nastiest vehicles for damage output, like I
you
was
can
saying.
move and shoot as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's why I just like, I don't think there's any, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's anything in the game that can shoot, move, and then melee attack. So,
Oh, I see. You're taking the scythe as an attack you have to make. I was assuming it was going to be an attack that automatically happens when you go over another model's volume or something like that.
that would be even cooler. I didn't even
That
consider
was
that
just
as an
what I had
option.
assumed.
If that's how that works, that will be even crazier. After you saying that, that's kind of how I hope it works now.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense, right? I mean you're doing the attack on a move, so as long as your volume interacts with their volume and you finish the move not, illegally, I don't know, that seems to make sense in my mind.
Yep, no, I would agree. So that covers what we know about the Empyreans and vehicles from the keynote. They did say that the Empyreans and vehicles will be coming to Kickstarter in the future. They didn't give us a date or any time frame, so keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. I'm hoping it'll probably be later this year once the Riot Quest Kickstarter ends, but who knows with everything going on right now, right?
Well, I
Now,
think they've confirmed that there's no models until next year.
oh, maybe they did and I missed it.
So, so, um, so I'm guessing that means we're going to get the Kickstarter this year, but delivery won't be till next.
Which, you know what, makes sense considering we don't get the last of the first Kickstarter stuff till at least September. So,
Yeah. I mean, I would assume what we're going to do is we're doing the Riot Quest now. They're going to leave it a month or so. Then they're going to do the Iron Kingdom's new RPG. Leave it a little bit, and then we'll probably get us right after they've delivered the final wave. Because I don't. It just seems like a slippery slope for them to give us another Kickstarter for the same game that they haven't delivered yet.
yep.
I think that might rub people the wrong way.
Well, considering excellent transition, by the way. Considering
I'm a
how,
professional.
and this is why I brought you in. There had to be one professional on this podcast, so thank you for filling that void. No pun
I'm very
intended.
good at filling voids.
So that transitions into something we wanted to talk about at the end, and the community's thoughts on the Kickstarters. There seems to be mixed reactions to Privateer Press kickstarting things. A lot of people find it to be off-putting and think they're cutting out local game stores, and some have said they're getting greedy. I think it's Privateer's way of rectifying their distribution issues without having to go to actual distributors and work out a plan with them, considering they've had issues with them in the past. And it also allows them to gauge how much product they need for the releases. They basically use Kickstarter as an elaborate pre-order system, and then based on that, I'm sure that allows them to backfill their inventory with what they think they'll need after the fact.
Well, let's point out. So some of the things I've seen people say, potential criticisms. One that I've seen both in my own like Discord community when I was talking about Warcaster with them, and also even in the Keynote privateer press stream, like somebody typed it in. It was the notion that using Kickstarter is something you only do if you don't have any confidence in the product. And I mean, I don't really have an. I was hoping I was just going to throw that to you and then you answered that, but you didn't jump in. So basically, I don't think that's the reason they're doing it.
Sorry.
As far as I can tell, Kickstarter, as you say, is just a so it's a way to do a pre-order system. And the good thing about Kickstarter is that it is a common platform that everyone's aware of. And so it may well draw in, if the Kickstarter goes viral, as things can do when they are, when they go well and they're placed on the front page of Kickstarter. So it might actually, it's a marketing tool as well, basically.
Sorry,
In my view.
I was digesting what you said there because you had a good point.
I regularly do, but which one exactly?
When you were talking about how people think that that Privateer Press
Lack
has
of
no
confidence?
confidence, that
Oh, I don't think that. Yeah,
I
I don't think that's true at all. No.
no, I don't either. Especially considering like they're kickstarting the second wave of Riot Quest, which Riot Quest has been very well received in the community. I think you're right that it is an excellent marketing tool because a lot of people just like I have a lot of friends that just browse Kickstarter just to
Yeah,
check
sure.
out what's coming out. And like I alluded to, it's a elaborate pre-order system which lets them get their numbers a little more accurate, and it just overall like I feel like allows them to be their own distributor on like the ground level. And by no means are they cutting out the local game stores. They specifically put in a retailer level in the Kickstarter so retailers can back it and get in on the ground floor of everything so people can just order their Kickstarter through their local game store. So by no means do I feel like Privateer is trying to cut out any local game stores or hurt local game stores in any way. I think it's just their way of handling the distribution issues they've had in the past, and it just cuts out a middleman.
So let's be clear, I haven't been following Privateer Press closely enough to speak on this as much as somebody else may be able to. I don't really know the ins and outs of all of the distribution issues they were having a year or two ago, whenever it was. The only thing I do know is that their team are actively reaching out to local game stores with Warcaster specifically and saying, do you want our sample box? Do you want to stock this? So I've never quite understood what exactly people are meaning when they say that Privateer Press is trying to cut them out, because I know that they are actively trying to find, local game stores that are going to take the stock. So my only assumption, and this is pure guessing on my side, I haven't even heard anybody else mention this is the reason, is that perhaps they are only going to be supplying the local game stores with one shipment, like on the big launch, but then they're not going to resupply them.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's true. That's the only thing I can possibly imagine is what these people mean.
I don't think that would be true. I think that like if a local game store wanted to continue to order their product, if they can't get it through the distributor, like they can get it straight through Privateer. So I don't think that's an issue at all. I just think like it puts a bad taste in people's mouth. Like they think that Privateer is trying to sell directly to the person versus where they give the stock to a local game store and the local game store makes money off of it, which I get to some degree is sort of true because a certain amount of people do back the Kickstarter directly. But for people that want to support their local store, they give them the option to like, hey, talk to your store, get some people on board. Let's tell them like X amount of you guys want to order, and then your store can order it for you. Now, the only bummer is there are required minimums to purchase at the Kickstarter delivery, and that may put off some stores. But if a community is passionate about pushing Warcaster and getting it going, having a couple extra boxes in the store may not be a bad thing. So that's one
I
thing.
don't think, if I may just say, I mean the retail pledge, it was, I believe you got 6 starter boxes.
Yes.
Like, I don't think any store would even consider 1 box because then they can't sell it, right?
Yeah.
So I think 6 really is a minimum. I mean, that's 2 of each faction. Going below that, I don't really see why anybody, a stockist would even consider stocking it. So but you're only talking about specifically the Kickstarter here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And well, no, I agree like 100% that like a lot of people like to play 2 factions even. So bringing in 18 boxes, so 6 of each faction or whatever, like that's 3 of those kits, doesn't seem like a bad thing either. Because if you only bring in 2 of each kit, that could be 5-6 players and that's it. Or it could be 3 players because each player picked up 2 factions. You know what I mean? So
Also, I think, I suppose my final note on this, again, because I don't know enough to say anything of any authority,
yeah,
is that if Privateer Press is genuinely attempting to cut out the local game store, that is incredibly short-sighted of them. Like, that's the worst business decision I could ever imagine. Um, that might be what they're trying to do, but I can't imagine a company thinking that's a good idea.
no,
They're not. They know how this, the community works. If there's no community, nobody's going to buy the box.
yeah,
If there's a box on the shelf, somebody might buy it, might bring a friend along. Even if it's a loss, even if they lose money by selling it through an FLGS, you kind of have to.
yes.
And I'm assuming they know that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see any realm where it is a possibility that they are trying to cut out a local game store. It, like you said, it doesn't make business sense. So I would just say, like, on a final note, just try and like they haven't kickstarted that many things like outside of a few small releases in War Machine. So give it a little time. Let's see how it is accepted. Let's see how it goes for your local gaming stores. Give them a bit of time. Like, they're trying a new system that not a lot of other companies try, and in every business there is evolution. So maybe this is the natural next step of miniature gaming and distribution. But I think that really rounds that out. Like, I can't see any other possibility for that other than we just have to wait and see. Now, we had a few questions from the community that I wanted to cover, and a few that are going to be great episodes for down the road.
Before we jump to that, can I just quickly throw this out there?
Yeah.
I Googled it. So, hyper-Uranian, right?
Yep.
Uranian is an element like uranium, but it ends with an ION instead of AUM. Uranian is just an element. It's like a radioactive rock, metal. There you go. So it's basically saying hyper radioactive metal.
Oh my God. So what you're saying is hyper radioactive insectoid aliens is what we're getting.
Yeah, like super metal, I guess. Energy infused super metal. And That's me. That's your glass half dead, super lore in depth dive. There you go. All right.
And I would just like to say that's terrifying. I want
No,
no part of
yeah.
that.
I don't know. They look kind of cute.
Yeah, because you would totally pet one.
Yeah, I'd lose my hand instantly, but you got to make sacrifices sometimes.
Hey, maybe you get a sweet metal hyper Uranian hand. Like, sacrifices have to be made.
Hey, now you're talking my language. I'm okay with that.
So, we we have a few questions. I'm just gonna go down the list here. From First off, I want to apologize if I butcher anyone's name. That is the hardest thing about doing a cast, is trying to get people's names right. James Meredith wants us to make crazy predictions about the game for the future. 1 years, 5 years, etc. I think we'll just stick to 1 and 5 for now because that's quite the scope. Do you have any prediction you want to kick off with?
Oh, yeah. I've thought about this a lot. Okay, I'm going to give you two things. Firstly, I'm going to give you how things look in 1 year, and then I'm going to give you a concept for 5 years. Okay, let's start with the concept because I think that's kind of the fun one. So colossals, right? I think the colossal models from I keep wanting to say Warcaster, but it's War Machine and Hordes. I love them. I think they look so amazing. I think, for example, the Mountain King, and then I think, is it a Glacier King?
Yep.
Ice King. I think those are some of the best models I've seen. Like, I genuinely think they are better than anything GW has put out. Right. Obviously, it's super aesthetic choice, whatever you want. So I love them, and I want to see the Warcaster version of them. Okay. However, what is a colossal in Warcaster going to be? Firstly, I can't see how they balance that at all, so I kind of want it to be narrative only. But ignoring that, I think the Colossal is going to be a ship, right? So you can essentially start with a ship on the board. Obviously, it's going to be a small ship. It's only 120 mil base, but and I think it's going to be specifically designed. I can't speak specifically designed with 30 mil like gangplanks or like walkways or steps on it, so you can put models on it as an actual transport and move the colossal, and obviously all of the guys that are on it move with it. There you go. That is my crazy 5 year colossal idea. And in 1 year's time, I think we're going to have the actual game, which is a slightly less crazy concept, I realize. So I basically, when anybody is launching a new IP, when any company's going for a new IP, this is a whole nother thing I could talk about, but it's really difficult. You have to release enough so that you satisfy enough people, but at the same time, you cannot release everything immediately. You are never going to compete with 28 factions from Warhammer on day one. That's just not a thing. So how much do you release at the start? How much do you wait to release, etc.? I think within a year's time, we are going to have 5 factions fully released up to, 2 squads, 2 solos. Sorry, it's 3 squads, isn't it? 3 squads, 2 solos, light jack, warjack, light vehicle. And anything else I forgot to say then. Oh, heavy warjack, obviously. And I think that is kind of where the game begins. I genuinely think before then, we are not playing catch-up, that's the wrong word, but we're not playing with a full deck of cards, if you will. That wasn't meant to allude to the cipher deck. That was just terminology. That was a phrase. So, I believe in 1 year's time, we are going to have the full game. There you go.
So, you cut my grass on the 5-year prediction thing.
No.
Oh, it's so hard. I was going the same direction. I'm listening to your 5-year prediction. I'm like, okay.
I can give a different one if you want to take credit for that.
No, I appreciate that. But I have a slightly different take on it. where you said you think they'll have gangplanks that you can drop, like carry things on. I think that vehicles will be able to give you a bit more of a mobile deployment sense, where like you might be able to move that colossal and then drop like a scythe light vehicle out of it, kind of like a void gate that moves. Versus like it still kind of acts like a transport. It just functions slightly differently. You know what I mean?
Well,
Now,
that sounds much more realistic, if I may say, and and like it would look cooler because if you have to, so the way I said it, you'd have to have multiple spots on it where a 30 mil base can stand. So you'd have to have multiple spots that are just flat with nothing on them, which aesthetically isn't going to look very good. You know.
no.
So yeah, yours is a better idea.
I'm not 100% sure. I don't think they've actually confirmed any 30 mil bases yet. Are the squads on 30 mil? I thought they were on 40 mil.
No, all the squads currently on 30s.
Okay.
A few of the so basically all of the starter sets, all of the models in those are 30 mils, or if they're warjacks, they're 50s. Some of the solos, so for example in March Worlds, your boys, the engineers are 40s.
That's what it was. It was the light jack and heavy jack both sharing the 50s is what had me confused.
That's right.
There.
Yeah.
I do like your concept of like having them ride the vehicle, but in my head I just see like this giant hovering ship just deploying vehicles out of it to lay siege. You know what I mean? That would be like my want / crazy prediction for colossals down the road. Now for the game a year from now, I'm going to agree that I think we'll be playing with a full deck of cards. I want to say at the rate we're going, 5 factions is realistic, though I would like to see 6. And I think after a year of releases, I think we'll start to see organized play being formed, which is both my hope and prediction for a year from now. I think that's about the sweet spot to start putting together organized play for Warcaster, whether it's just like little supported in-store events or actual like tournaments at Lock and Load. We'll have to see, but I think that organized play will be right around the corner around that time. I'm a huge proponent of organized play, so I think it never hurts a game and always helps to grow it. So I really hope that's the direction Warcaster goes.
Yeah, I suppose I should have agreed with that. I'm pretty excited for. In fact, one of the reasons I'm even emotionally backing Warcaster is that competitive play is really big for me because, in my opinion, it drives the community. Yeah.
Yeah, drives the community. It gets people involved in playing in the stores where otherwise you might just play at home. And then people walk into your LGS and they see this game on the table and they're like, man, those, like that hover ship or that bike looks super cool. What is this? And you start that conversation of, this is what is happening. Like it's a futuristic game. And then, you know what? You walk them over to that wall and those extra boxes that your local game store ordered through Kickstarter, maybe they buy one of those. You know what I mean? Like,
So you know how you wanted to do the 5-year Colossal story?
yes.
Can I change my 5-year plan?
Do it.
Okay. Narrative campaign expansion.
Ooh.
Okay, so hear me out. I don't play narrative games. However, and I'm purely... Okay, so for anyone that isn't aware, my entire thing is that I want more people to play the game. Everything I say, everything I do in my community, it's to try and make the community welcoming for people that want to play Warcaster. My sole purpose is to get more people playing the game. In an entirely selfish way, because I want more people to play against, right? Okay. looking at Warhammer, yes, the competitive community is very vocal online, but there is no mistaking the fact that the narrative community is bigger. The people that you never hear about, never hear from, because they don't care enough to go and, spout uh, everything about just toxic vitriol online. They just go and they buy they buy their models and they hang out with their friends at home and you never know they exist. That is the core audience of Warhammer.
You
And
never
I'm
know they
saying
exist until you go to a con and they have a giant story diorama set up.
exactly, exactly. And I think that skipping out on them because the most vocal part of the community is competitive is a huge loss. And so I would really like to see a very comprehensive narrative campaign book, hardback book. I love the artwork. I'm all about that. It doesn't have to be. It could be free. It could be whatever. But just a way to get new people in and say, hey, it's a pretty cool game. If, this guy's called Fred. He's got a wound because in the last battle he was removed from the board and blah blah blah. There you go. Yeah.
So piggybacking off that idea, I would really like to see some Warcaster microfiction like they did with the Henge Scrolls, where they are you familiar with the Henge Scrolls?
I am familiar with the Henchhold scrolls, but if I may say, why not full fiction? Why not a book?
Why not both? So I will say that I do love reading their books, but one of like my favorite things each day would be waiting for that notification on my phone from Twitter that a new little tidbit of the scroll was put up. And like it pulled me in and it really like I don't want to say they did this on purpose, but it preyed on my like impulsive consumerism. Like they told a story about Vlad and riding into battle against the Infernals with just an absolute metric ton of cavalry. Well, I can tell you within a week, I had bought Vlad 3 and 4 units of cavalry.
Right.
Like it was just such an epic scene described that it just like sucks you in.
You should probably find a different way to phrase that. Preying on your excessive consumerism sounds like a negative,
It it,
but
it does.
but you are correct. I mean, anybody that's ever read Warhammer fiction, there is no hiding that they released novels next to new releases of models. And then that new model will appear in the book and it will do something awesome. That they're adverts, right?
But that's the one thing I would like to see along the side of like a narrative campaign in the game is just a bit of like fiction and or microfiction. But I don't know if we're close to being on base with it, but we'll revisit this in a year / maybe 5 years if we're lucky enough to still be around. And we'll see how close we are. We could be way off. But that's the fun about predictions, right? So, our next question is from Marc-Andre LeBlanc. And he wanted to know what are the standout Jack loadouts you have found for each faction? And Mark, we are going to answer your question, but we are going to make that its own episode because that is such a broad topic. I could literally talk about that for an hour. So I think we're going to put a pin in that one. I am going to write that down and put it aside, and we will make that its own episode for you. Another question we got from Will Sneed is what was one rule you messed up on and overlooked in the beginning when you started playing the game? So mine is pretty glaringly obvious if you have watched any of the videos I've put out. I overlooked the fact that you can't play 2 cipher cards on something. I read the rule, but my brain processed it differently. On I thought that when it says you can't play 2 cipher cards on something, it meant like 2 cipher cards that last the whole round. So like I would put Ascension Catalyst. I would put something that gives. I can't remember the card name. It's escaping me. But I would put something that Plexity Densifier on a unit, and then I would next turn play the card on it that lets it move 3 for free, thinking that you can have one that's active for the whole round, and then you can have one that activates instantly on your card. But if you read the rules, it explicitly states that you can only use 1 cipher card per unit. So I'm pretty sure that was my glaring mistake in the beginning. What about you, Andrew?
Yeah,
This is where
I'm
he
gonna
tells
go
us he doesn't
with
make
how.
mistakes.
Yeah, no. So I'm going to ignore my very first game because that was just silly. It was I had just printed off, the playtest rules, and I went down to play a practice game with a friend, having not read them fully, and having only just watched the Privateer Press first ever, how to play stream, and was kind of like, yeah, I get it, and I just messed everything up. It wasn't a real game. So I'll ignore that because that's boring. But I think the biggest thing for me was the way they do line of sight and obscurity and cover is very different to how it happens in Kill Team, which is the game that I mainly play. And it took me a while to just kind of get the concept that it's volume to volume and you have to accept that these are abstract things. So even though, yes, the very tip of this model's toe cannot quite see the very tip of your model's toe, and that means you get cover. It took me a long time to just kind of accept that, I suppose, because I was like, oh, but does that really matter? But yeah, there you go.
Okay, yep, I could see that. It is like quite different than cover rules in many other games, so
Yeah,
I think that's perfectly reasonable. Those are like 2 of the easiest things to mess up too, I would think. That being said, I'm interested to see in the new rulebook if there has been any changes to both cover and the way that you apply cipher cards. Because I would like to be able to put a continuous cipher card on something and play the one-shots on it. But I can understand how down the road that could cause some unsavory interactions.
yeah, being able to stack things, I know can be like pretty game breaking if you don't always account for it,
Yeah.
and then always accounting for it can be really difficult actually, and very limiting to their design space.
Yeah, so that could be why that rule is in effect. So I won't be too upset if that's the way it happens, but I did enjoy playing it wrong while I did it. Now we have 2 more questions. One I think we sort of already covered, and we will cover again in the future when we get more information on them. Darren McGregor asked us to talk about your opinion on flyers/vehicles and the impact it could potentially have on the battlefield. I think we covered that as we went over the vehicles. And I think once we have more information on each of them, we will revisit that and we will talk at length about how that will impact the game. I did just do a quick bit of research, and I asked a bunch of questions to Travis Marg. I hope I said that right. Sorry, Travis, if I didn't. About Warcaster rules, and he did confirm that you can't stack continuous and one-shot cipher cards, even under the revised rules.
Good.
So, there you go. You have your answer to that nice and quick. That's how I like to take care of things. Now, our last question, and I'm pretty excited for this one, by Louis Nin. Again, I hope I said your name right. What are your favorite cipher cards and why? So I think we each picked 3 for now because that's another pretty broad topic. I think in an episode in the future, we're actually going to rank cipher cards based on their type in a competitive environment. But for now, we just picked 3 of each, 3 of our favorites to talk about. I'm going to be talking about my experience as a Marcher Worlds player and why I like my 3. And then Andrew has picked 3 as well that are different from my 3 to cover. So I'll kick it off with what I think is the most amazing cipher card in the game that you can never leave out of your deck. Arcane Synthesis. The ability to put an arc on something during your charge phase and then be able to drop Arcane Synthesis to fully load up a jack or something with 3 arcs so it can do work is invaluable. There have been a lot of times where I have charged up a solo and then used Arcane Synthesis to load up a Dusk Wolf or a Strike Raptor so it gets extra dice. And I'll use the Strike Raptor, I'll use the Jack to put a lot of damage into something, and then I'll either come behind it with my mechanic to take the token off of it so it can reactivate the next turn, or I'll use a hunter to finish something off because I needed that little bit of extra damage. Being able to put arc on 2 things in one turn is huge. It helps you don't have to quite plan as much. There's not as much forethought involved. It's just like, this is what I want to do this turn. I'm playing this. So I think it is probably one of the strongest, if not the strongest cipher cards, and invaluable in any deck. My second cipher card is coming more from a Marcher Worlds perspective. We talked earlier about in games how the high ground is pretty valuable, especially with stuff like a Strike Raptor that has a 20-inch range. So I like playing Ascension Catalyst, which gives you +2 speed and flight to get me up on the high ground, so then I can use my long-range powerful guns to control the board and stop my opponent from getting to where they need to get to. I almost always put that in my deck, whether it is a skirmish game or a full-size game, just because you never know when you need to get up on a piece of terrain easily. And a lot of times I will pair that with Impulse Inducer, which is my 3rd cipher card. Impulse Inducer lets you pull a token off of that, or off of a jack, so you can use it again the next turn. So I like to use the Ascension Catalyst to get my guy up onto a piece of terrain, and then I will use the Impulse Inducer to remove the token off so it can start firing right away and it's not out of commission for an excessive length of time. Because if you don't have a way to activate that jack soon, sometimes it's just a target sitting up on high ground or just like an oversized paperweight. You got it up there, but how long will it take you to actually use it? So that's just a brief overview of 3 of my favorite cipher cards. Would you pick, Andrew?
Right, so I noticed that you didn't mention any Furies, so I thought I'd talk about some. And then I picked one orange card, just because why not? So let's start with the orange card. It's Reiteration Complex. You've got to use it on a squad, and essentially, during the activation, everyone in the squad can make 1 additional ranged attack. Quick note, it doesn't matter. Okay, so you just get to attack again with 3 people, but obviously the more people you stack into the squad, so if you put an attachment in there, that'll be 4 people. It's just a nice solid card. Obviously, squads aren't typically that, good at taking out jacks. But if you need to take out something that's not a warjack, So, one of the solos or the squads, they can probably get it done. I just factually can't argue with the everyone gets to shoot again. That just sounds really good. Then I went with Cryolock. I think everybody knows Cryolock. Uh, Cryolock is a Fury card, so you have to cast it from your caster, obviously. So not just anywhere on the board. And essentially, you can put an activation token next to a Warjack. Have I made that? Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Is
Yep.
it only a Warjack?
Nope, it's anything.
No, it's anyone. It's
Yep.
anyone.
Your
Yeah.
Weaver,
So,
your Weaver
yeah,
casts it,
anyone.
and it can really affect the tempo of the game. So I do agree with Cryolock, if used
Yeah.
correctly, being a very huge cipher card.
Yeah, I mean, so the reason I said Warjack there is because I was thinking, oh, that's always the most dangerous thing on the board, and typically it is, but not always. Obviously, hitting it on another Weaver stops them from possibly using a Fury. No, it doesn't, because you can use a Fury
Yeah.
even when they've got a activation token next to them. I'm doing really well. Okay, so I think that's an obvious one.
Can
I
I
don't
interject
think that you
with
can
one
lead.
point?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So, not so much in skirmish games because you can score at the end of a unit's activation, but in full-size games, Cryolock can be huge because tokening up an opponent's squad so they can't get to a location to score, in a lot of cases, may be just as huge as tokening up that jack. That's the only thing I'll say on Cryolock.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, that sounds like a really strong, solid way of doing it. And I mean, that can lead into a whole thing about do you want to go first or second in the game? But yes, very cool. And then the other one is Pyrokinetic Surge. If you watch my How to Play Warcaster, you will see I use Pyrokinetic Surge because so Marcher Worlds have access to quite a bit of flame, so they don't care about it as much. But for example, on ISA, it's a 17-inch flamer. Essentially, all you have to do is hit. You don't even have to successfully damage, and flame is massive. I mean, it's -1 mat and rat, and potentially, 1 or 2 damage at the end of your turn, or end of the pulse round turn thing. I always get confused about whether it's a pulse round or a turn or whatever.
It'll be
Yeah,
the end of a pulse round.
sure, sure. So yeah, a 17-inch flamer for the ISA there. I don't think anyone can complain with that. And that's it. There you go. 3 simple cards that I think, unless you have a super specific tactic that you're needing your entire deck for, you will probably find in most decks. Cypher, it's called Rack, isn't it?
Yes.
Apart from possibly Marcher Worlds taking Pyrokinetic Surge, they might think it's not worth it because they're already getting enough flame out there.
Yeah, fire is huge. There's a lot of times where being a Marcher player that I will combo a Blazer that lets me set a bunch of things on fire with tune-up, so my stuff has extra defense. That way, my opponent's minus a dice, I'm plus a dice. It really skews the math in the favor of the Marcher Worlds, so it is definitely a major strategy to consider, and I can't really pick holes in anything you chose as far as your 3 cipher cards. I think they're very strong ciphers. Reiteration Complex, I always bring in my deck. Cryolock, when I started, I didn't see the value of, but quickly I found a slot for it in my deck. And you're right, as a Marcher Worlds, I typically don't bring the Fire Fury card, but I will say that Fire is never bad. So I think we covered all the viewer questions, and I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone that dropped us a question. I hope we answered them thoroughly enough for you, and a few of them are going to be episodes in the future. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy out there in these crazy times. I want to thank Andrew from Glass Half Dead on YouTube for joining me today. I hope he comes back for future episodes.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been good fun.
Do you have any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Final thoughts. I kind of managed to put out my big spiel because of one of the questions somebody asked, where is the game in 1 year's time? I kind of, I'm quite passionate about that, odd as it might sound, that if Warcaster isn't grabbing people right now, I think it's a factor of, they haven't put the full game out yet. Every new IP is slow to begin, and ninth edition 40K is currently flooding everything. But I genuinely think that in a year's time, once everything else has calmed down and we've got some more factions out there, Warcaster has the potential, of course, you never know, right? Has the potential to legitimately be one of the top games out there.
So, as I've done for most of this episode, I'm going to piggyback off that thought. I do agree that I think Warcaster has great potential, and we have seen that Privateer Press really puts an emphasis on balanced rules these days. It puts their games in a very good spot for competitive and supported play in stores. So I would look forward to that, and I would just like to say that I think Privateer killed it with the keynote yesterday. There was a lot of things to get excited about, and I look forward to seeing how all the different vehicles in the new faction flesh out over the next couple months. With that being said, thank you for joining us for episode 1, and we will talk to you guys soon.
Stay safe out there.